Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf kaf dalid of Bava Basra. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So we are in the middle of something actually at the moment. Yesterday we saw a statement by Rabbi Hanina that although the principles of following the majority and following the closest source, following proximity, are both biblical concepts, when they conflict, we should follow the majority. That's what Rabbi Hanina said. So again, if we don't have anything about majority, we're going to follow the proximity. If we don't have anything about proximity, we're going to follow the majority. But when we have them both in a particular situation, so then we'll follow the majority rather than proximity. And yesterday we brought two challenges to this principle, and we defeated each challenge. Today we begin on the fifth line from the bottom of Kav Gimel Amabet with the third challenge to Rabbi Hanina. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up, Tashma. So Tashma, come, let's hear another Mishnah. We're going to see another Mishnah. Actually, it's our Mishnah and another part of our Mishnah. We cited earlier the very first part of our Mishnah. Now we cite the end of our Mishnah because it says, Nimtza bein shnei shovachot, that if you find the baby chick between two dovecotes, Karav Lazeshalo, the Karav Lazeshalo, we return it to the person who is the closest owner of, who owns the closest dovecote. And that's true, even though maybe the other dovecote might be larger. So doesn't that show that we follow proximity and not majority? So doesn't that conflict with Rabbi Hanina's statement? So the Gemara answers Hakabamayaskinan Shishneim Shavin, that in the situation that we're talking about is where they're both of equal size. And so as a result, when the two dovecotes are of equal size, so then we are going to focus solely on proximity. The Lizel Bazar Ruba de Alma. Well, 1 second, why don't we follow the rove of the world? And the vast, vast majority of the world doesn't own any chicks in this area. And so as a result, when I find it, I should be able to keep it. So, here's what we're talking about. Because don't we need to be worried that somebody might have, well, actually, let's take a look and see. Rashi here helps us clarify. Right, the last Rashi on the daf, and so it should belong to the finder. The kasalka daita, that at this moment we're assuming nimtza bein shtei shavachot achutz lechamishim ama nami kai, that we're talking about even when you find the chick outside the 50 amot radius that we talked about earlier. Denafik le mitorah madada, where we're not discussing, where we've left the concept of jumping, of hopping birds. That in fact we're now talking about all kinds of birds, and what we're saying is that if in fact the bird is found more than 50 amos away from each of the shovachot, but each of the dovecotes, but not too far away from, but not too far away. And so as a result, we say that this one is closer than the other. So as a result, we'll follow that one. But maybe we should go based on the majority of the entire world. So Hakabamayaskinan, here's what we're talking about as we turn to Kav Dalid Amud Aleph 24a, top of the page.
What is rove here? What is rove referring to in the majority of the world or in this year?
Well, the majority of the world doesn't own any birds in this area, right? The majority of the birds in the world are not owned by these two people, and we won't know who owns them. And so as a result, who defines it should be able to keep it. Okay, so that's the majority of the world. So we're going to say Bishvil Shel Kramim. We're talking about a situation where the birds are found in a pathway vineyards. So as a result, you've got effectively a blockage on both sides, because if you've been to a vineyard, you can't see through the vineyard. So as a result, that this little chick only can see in two directions. And in those two directions, it sees the two dovecotes. It sees one dovecote of one owner and the other dovecote of the other owner. And we answer that we're going to follow the one that's closest in that situation. Because the im isa me'alma de me'alma asi. Because if you want to say that it came from somewhere else, kaven de midade lo matzi asi. It's not possible to come from somewhere else, because again, we're going to stick with the hopping situation. That if in fact it might jump more than 50 amos away, it will never jump more than 50 amos when it can no longer see its nest. So in that situation, midade, there it will hop as long as it can turn around and see its nest. The lo midade. And so as a result, we're going to assume that in fact this bird, even though it's more than 50 amot away potentially, it must have come from one of these two locations. So let's take a look at the top Rashi, Bishvil shel kramim. So the al yedei kramim, because as a result of these vineyards, the Mesoras Hashas changes it to madda. Madda chutz l'chamishim. It may have jumped itself more than 50 amot, because again, because it has this direct view path towards its original dovecote. The Hagos Habach adds the word ama here. So okay. So umihu, and nevertheless, basa ruba de alma leka lemezel. Nonetheless, we can't follow the rove of the rest of the world. To kol hamidada, all the birds that hop, the chazi lekine, need to be able to see their dovecotes, the kishamachzer rosha, when they turn around. So then, only in that situation, madada, elo, and if they can't see it, lo madada, they're not going to hop away. Bahai ima alma asa, and this bird, if it were to have come from somewhere else, lo matzi chazi lekine, it wouldn't be able to see its nest. Thank you. The karamim mafsikin lefana, because the vineyard itself would block its view. Okay, so now we've answered that question, and so we've figured out the situation.
Wait, if it's in a straight line between two shovchot and it can't see on either side of it, because there's a vineyard on either side between the two vineyards. He sees straight ahead, sees straight behind him, this little bird. So
correct.
Why would we suggest that the bird would turn around to see its original? The bird could look forward and see the next nest, and maybe assume that the next nest is also a viable nest for him to use.
So two thoughts about that I was just thinking about that myself. So the first is that we're talking about a baby chick. So presumably the baby chick wants to go to its, is concerned about its original nest. But the second thought that I had is that you may be right. Maybe that's a basis to say that it's going to, maybe that's one of the reasons why you might find it more than 50 amot away, because it could see forward to its actual nest. And so as a result, maybe that's
to another nest.
You bring sorry to another nest. Exactly. That's what, apologies. That's exactly what I meant. It can look forward and see to another nest. So maybe that's why it extends. But those are not inconsistent with the conclusion that in the end we say that we're going to follow the proximity, because we're talking about two dovecotes that are of equal size. And so now we need to have a decision-making methodology. And we could just say that everything between them is, gets split. but it's a lot easier for us to say that if it's closer to one side, that's who gets it. And if it's closer to the other side, that's who gets it. So I think you're right that I think that's part of what's going on, but that's my sense. So I don't know if that's a full answer to you, but those are my thoughts.
So in that case, if it's closer, if it's beyond 50 and it's closer to the neighboring dovecote, then we would assume it goes to the neighbor one and not the original one.
That's exactly right. 100%. That's exactly what the halacha would be. So now that we've offered these three challenges and we've rebutted the three challenges, Abaye turns around and says, hey, I think I have support for Rabbi Hanina's statement. Amar Abaye, afananami tanina. We actually have, usually tanina refers to a brisa, but actually in this case it's a mishnah. It's a mishnah in Nida, where we say the following: Dam shenimtza beprosdor. If there's blood that's found in what's referred to as sort of the corridor or the vestibule, this refers to the woman's vaginal canal. And so if the woman finds blood there, sveiko tame, even though there's a suffix as to where it comes from, she's considered tame. Shechez kaso min hamakor, because we assume that it came from the uterus. And blood from the uterus, unless it's a wound there, blood that naturally flows from the uterus, causes a woman to become tameh. She becomes a nida, va'ava, or potentially a zav or zava. A zava. So va'aval gab de ika aliyah de mikarava. Now that was the end of the Mishnah. Now we're going to point, how is this a proof and support to Rabbi Hanina? Because let's think about it. Where could the blood come from? Well, the blood could come from a wound that's in the vaginal canal, and that would certainly be closer than any place else because the uterus is further away than the skin of that canal. Exactly, internally. And so as a result, maybe it comes from what is referred to as the upper chamber. Not exactly clear what physiology, from a physical perspective that's referring to, but the bottom line is that it could be coming from a closer location. There are other sources of blood that are closer. So doesn't this show that we follow the rove? Because most blood that would be in the vaginal canal is not from that source. It comes from the uterus. And so as a result, that shows that we follow the majority. So Amrle Rava, no, Rava says that doesn't work because Rov Umatzika Amrit, you're talking about a majority and frequency. Rov Umatzui Leikalamanda Amar. But everybody would agree when you have majority and frequency. Now, exactly what the difference between majority and frequency are, it's not completely clear. And as a result, we're going to now undermine that and basically say that no, majority and frequency are really the same thing. Because if it's completely infrequent, then it's not going to necessarily be the majority. And so as a result, because I guess, literally we can understand it as, look, if you take a look at the amount of blood, of course, if you take a look at the entire body, more blood is elsewhere in a woman's body than in the uterus. But if we take a look, when we're looking at what majority means, majority generally means what is frequent in this particular location. But in any event, the bottom line is that we're going to say that that's what Rava responds. That's maybe this is not a good proof. Now, Tosus here in the Tosos Ditani Rabbi Chia tells us, if we take a look at this, Igar Sinan Tani Asi Shapir. If the next word in the Gemara, as printed in the Gemara, it says Ditani, which seems to suggest that it's being brought as a proof to Rava. But Tosos notes that if you take out the Dalid, it makes sense. About Igar Sinan Ditani, but if you actually use it with the Dalid, Tema, it's a wonder. Hechi Maisi Mehacha Derov Umatzui Hu. How do you show from what we're going to see that this is actually a case of Rov Umatzui? this is not what we're about to cite is actually a counter proof to Rava. So as a result, take out the Dalid, and we're going to read it as follows. So Tani Rabbi Chia. So actually, the response to Rava is as follows. Rabbi Chia taught the following brisa. Dam hanimtza b'prosdor. When you find blood in the vaginal canal, chayavin alav al bia mikdash. When if the woman were to go into the Beis Hamikdash, she would be obligated to bring a sin offering if she did so without awareness, with not realizing what she was doing. The sorfin alav as a truma, and if she touched truma, she's sufficiently tameh that the truma is burned. Meaning that this is not just simply an uncertainty, but it's an uncertainty where we're going to actually reach a definitive conclusion. We are not going to be, well, maybe we need to be concerned that we're not certain. We are going to be definitive in our ruling that she's in fact tameh. So that shows that she's tameh without, beyond any shadow of a doubt. V'amar Rava, and Rava learns from Rabbi Chia's statement, Shema mina Rabbi Chia tlas. He says that we learned three things. Now, again, remember, Rava is the one who rejected Abaye's proof, but we're going to see that that's going to cause an internal inconsistency within Rava. So, Shema mina Rabbi Chia tlas. So we learned three things from Rabbi Chia. Shema mina rov v'karov halach achar rov. That when it comes to rov and karov, when we have the majority and proximity, we follow the majority. So and of course, that was exactly Rabbi Chanina's statement. Ushma mina, and we also learn ruba d'oraisa, that the majority is a biblical concept, because if it wasn't a biblical concept, we couldn't possibly reach the conclusion that we are going to let this woman bring a korban out of a suffix. We don't. If we have a suffix, there's actually a special korban that we bring when there's a suffix. And so we're saying that she's going to bring a sin offering. And in addition, we wouldn't never burn truma if we were uncertain, because burning truma that isn't tameh is prohibited. So ushma mina isa l'Rebbe Zera. And in addition, we learn that Rebbe Zera is accurate. Da'amar Rebbe Zera, afal pisha dalsos medina nuolos, that when it comes to a situation, Rashi tells us that the situation is as follows. You have 10 butchers in a city. 9 of them have kosher meat. And now you find a nice wrapped piece of meat on the ground in the city. We're allowed to say that piece of meat, presumably it's wrapped, it's nice, if it's not, it's freeze packed, etc. Even though there's no identity of which butcher it came from, we can follow the majority. And that's true even if the doors to the city are locked. Because if the doors to the city are unlocked, well, then we actually can make an extra argument that this meat is kosher. Because not only would we say about a city where there are 9 kosher butchers and 1 non-kosher butcher, that most likely this meat, if it came from within the city, it would be from one of the kosher butcheries. But we would also say that who's likely to bring any meat into this place? Only kosher people, because the majority of people coming to this town are kosher people, because that's what we have here. We have 9 kosher butcheries and 1 non-kosher butchery. So as a result, we would say that even when it comes, we would have a double majority. We'd have a majority of people who are local, who would likely cause it to be a kosher piece, and we would have people coming in. But what Rabbi Zera said is that even when you have one majority, even if you locked the doors to the city so that it's not possible to come from anywhere else, we would still say that one majority is enough. That a woman's blood is like a situation where the gates are locked, meaning if you don't see any holes in her that could be the source of other blood, it's like those doors are locked, and therefore we're going to just follow the majority of what's available to her, and what's available to her is going to come from the uterus. Exactly. And yet, even though the woman's rest of her body is locked, we follow the majority that from within the particular area that we're talking about. Vaha Rava. Now the Gemara asks the question that responding. Well, 1 second. Rava just said, learning from the teaching of Rabbi Chia, that we can learn that in fact Rabbi Chanina is correct. But 1 second, Rava hu deka amar umatzui of rov umatzui leikelamanda amar. Rava, in this same situation of blood in the vaginal canal, said to Abaye, hey, what about, you can't say that that's a proof because it's a majority in frequency. Doesn't that same argument respond to Rava's statement that Rabbi Chia's teaching of the Brisa shows that Rabbi Chanina is correct? And the answer is Hadar Be Rava Me'ai. Rava actually went back from his original statement. And so the clear implication is that Rava ended up retracting his rejection of Abaye's proof, and Abaye's proof ends up being a valid proof. Okay.
Well, what is the proof? So, what does Abaye hold then in the end?
So Abaye says that Rabbi Chanina is correct, that in fact, when we say we have majority and proximity, we follow majority. Okay, and that's exactly the proof. Okay, now we can take a look. You know what? Let's we can do.
So what was the distinction?
Majority and frequency.
Oh, hold on just a second. Both of you were speaking at the same time. So first, Stan, go ahead, and then we'll.
Was it a majority in frequency instead of majority and
proximity? No. The majority and frequency was the argument that maybe majority and frequency are what you need to have both of in order to overcome proximity. That was Rava's counter proof to Abaye. And in the end, we say, no, we're not going to focus on even just majority. That's enough to beat proximity. You don't need majority with frequency. Okay. Now, of course, part of the reason may be is that frequency is actually incorporated into majority. And so as a result, it's not really a separate item, and therefore that may be why Rava retracted his original statement. Now you go ahead, Ken.
So what do we learn now from the distinction between Tani and Ditani?
So if we had, the problem is that what we learned from Rabbi Chia seems to contradict Rava's response, Rava's rejection of Abaye's proof. It was not supporting of Rava's rejection. If it had supported, then we would want the dalid there. A dalid means because or for, and so as a result, it is intended to support the prior point. But this bringing of Rabbi Chia's teaching ends up contradicting Rava. And so as a result, the dalid doesn't fit in that situation. That's the point at the beginning of the Tosfos, the Tani Rabbi Chia.
So what are we contradicting again?
We're contradicting Rava's rejection. Rava rejected Abaye by saying, you're talking about majority and frequency and not majority alone. But then we saw that Rava, in connection with Rabbi Chia's statement, refers to majority being sufficient without frequency, and he doesn't mention frequency. Indeed, he seems to say that Rabbi Chia's statement is consistent with Rabbi Chanina. And if that were, but the problem is Rabbi Chia and Abaye said the exact same thing. So how can Rava in one place reject the point and in another place accept the point? And so the Gemara has to conclude that Rava retracted his statement. And the statement that that we understand that he retracted is the statement in response to Abaye, the rejection of Abaye. So in the end, he not only accepts what Rabbi Chia says, but he must also have accepted what Abaye said, because they said the exact same thing. Okay? So now the Gemara wonders whether Rabbi Hanina's statement is subject to dispute among Amoraim. And we're going to cite a dispute between Rav and Shmuel and see, does that fit with this actually? Could they be arguing about whether or not they agree with Rabbi Hanina? Itmar, Chavish Shitzafa Benahar. We have a keg of wine, a barrel of wine that is floating in the river. And we're talking about the Euphrates. Amar Rav, Nimtzis Keneged Ir Sheruba Yisrael Mutter. Rav says that if you find that barrel of wine right next to a Jewish city, well then Keneged then it's going to be permitted. Keneged Ir Sheruba Nachrim Asira. And if it's a keg of wine that is near a non-Jewish city, well, then the wine is forbidden. And this is based on the concept, because wine technically is kosher, period. The ingredients are totally fine. The issue is that we have a prohibition of drinking non-Jewish wine, because wine is often used in idol worship ceremonies. And so as a result, we're concerned that this wine that we might have from a non-Jew might have been used in that inappropriate situation. And as a result, it's prohibited. And so that's our concern. So as a result, Rav says that concern only applies when it's a barrel that's near a non-Jewish city. But if it's a Jewish city, well, then we'll follow the proximity. Because, of course, we must be dealing with a proximity point, because the role of the world is not Jewish. So as a result, we're going to say that Rav is effectively rejecting Rabbi Hanina. Ushmuel Amar, it's prohibited even if it's near a Jewish city, because Amar Mahai Dikra Asai, because we could say that it came from Hai Dikra. And Hai Dikra was a city that is mostly not Jewish. And the idea being that we focus on the fact that it's Rove, not Jewish. And so we follow the majority, even if it's not proximate. So Lema could the Rabbi Hanina kamiflagi. Can we say that really they're arguing about Rabbi Hanina? Damar Islay the Rabbi Hanina. Shmuel agrees with Rabbi Hanina, and that's why it's not kosher no matter what. Umar Leisley the Rabbi Hanina, and Rab disagrees and says that it's kosher because of proximity. No, really, Dekuli Alma Islahu the Rabbi Hanina. Everybody agrees that we follow majority. But this is really what they're arguing about. Demar Savar im Isa Demehai Dikra Asai Akuli Ufshuri Havamit Bele. That Rav says that if it had come from Hai Dikra, it would have been caught up in one of the eddies or stagnant bodies. It would not have made it all the way here. The point being, on some level, right, this is incorporating what Rav is doing is incorporating frequency in majority, right? You can't look at majority without understanding frequency. Umar Savar Karifa Denahara Nakat Asai. And whereas Shmuel says, no, we just focus on global majority. We don't care about frequency at all. So that's at least my take on this. And so there we have it. So as a result, they all agree on some level that we follow the majority but the question is do we incorporate frequency into majority? Okay, so that is that. And now,
so what's the machloket then? If they both agree on Rove,
the question is do we say that because it's very infrequent for a barrel to come all the way from Hai Dikra to this location, we're therefore going to say it must not have come, and we're going to ignore that majority? Rav says we can ignore that majority. It's not truly a majority because it's so unlikely to have made it here. And Shmuel says, no, we don't ignore that majority. We don't incorporate frequency into majority. Okay.
Well, does
So
Rav
now-
hold by Rove?
Yes, everybody holds of Rove.
So he's just saying in this specific case, this barrel didn't come from Chai Dikra? Is that all he's
Correct,
saying?
because it's so unlikely to have made it there. That's right. Umar Sabra Charifa de Nahara Nakad Ba'asa. That maybe, whereas Shmuel says that maybe it got caught in the, in the strong current and therefore was able to make it all the way here. So, those are the two different opinions. And again, yes, Stan, you want to?
The analogy could be made between in the courts today, the preponderance of the evidence and the
And beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's an interesting thought as to what do we need to make a proof,
justified statement.
justify exactly. Interesting. All right. So now two different stories that we're going to take away from this.
So
So
this was another river, and it wasn't
What?
High Dikra. What it didn't. If it was another river, it wasn't High Dikra, then they would both hold similarly. It's just that they're focusing on this case that there would be a difference. One holds that it wouldn't.
Well, no, I mean, it depends on the nature of the river. Obviously,
Okay.
a river that's very similar to the Euphrates that has lots of places where, if you put a barrel in, it's unlikely to make it to the bottom of the river. Well, then they would say the same thing would apply. If on the other hand, you're talking about a river where it's almost always anything you put into the river is going to make it to the bottom of the river. Well, then, yeah, you're absolutely right. Then they would be in total agreement. Okay, so now two cases. Hahu chatzba de chamra. You have a barrel of wine, de ishtakach b'fardesa de arla, and it's found in a vineyard that is orla. Orla is the first 3 years. It's prohibited to have any of that produce. And so as a result, if that barrel were actually wine of Orla, it would be prohibited. Sharia Ravina. And yet, nonetheless, Ravina ruled that it was permitted. So the Gemara asks, Lema Mishum de Rabbi Chanina. Does this show that he agrees with Rabbi Chanina? Because after all, as Rashi says, Isa Shari Ravina, 1, 2, 3, 6 lines up from the bottom. Below Chash, and he's not worried, Shema Mikerem Zeganav Hayayin Zeh, that it was stolen from this particular vineyard, because we're assuming that this wine was stolen because it doesn't belong. The owner of this vineyard doesn't think it belongs to him. So, isn't aware of it. Let's put it that way. So, doesn't that show that he agrees with Rabbi Chanina that we follow the global majority and we don't focus on proximity? No.
Well,
Shiny
isn't Rashi saying the opposite? Velochash Shema Mikerem Zeganavayan. That we
yes,
don't.
he's saying that we don't worry about proximity. He's saying exactly what I said. I said he said we follow the majority of the world, and we don't worry about proximity. We don't worry about that
it might be stolen from this place.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't worry about proximity. We focus on majority. Okay. So doesn't that show that he agrees with Rabbi Chanina? And so we answer no. Shiny Hussam, that case could be different. De'i mignav mina, because if in fact you had stolen wine from this particular vineyard, you never would hide it there, right? You don't hide the item that you stole in the location that you stole it from. Now, bahani mili chamra, but that only applies to wine. Aval inde mitznai, but matznei. But if you actually were to steal grapes, well, then actually leaving it in its location is a fabulous strategy, because you can't tell the difference between what you stole and what actually belongs there. So it doesn't look like it doesn't belong there, and yet you have it readily available to you. So that's what the Gemara points out. I could not help but think that and I think I put it in the thing. This is like hiding hay in a haystack. Hiding hay in a haystack is a great place to hide hay. People talk about finding a pin in a haystack, but the truth is that on some level, it's easier to find the pin in the haystack than it is to find a particular strand of hay in the haystack. All right. Hanu Zike de case number 2. We had some leather bags of wine. Rashi calls them, what is it? Zike is no dote. These bags of the leather, leather skin bags of wine. The ashtagan big kufai that are found among vines. Now the vines are in a vineyard that belongs to Jews. Sharanhu Rava permitted them. So lema lo savarlai the Rabbi Chanina. Maybe that shows that Rava disagrees with Rabbi Chanina, and as we say at the bottom, lema lo savarla the Rabbi Chanina. Maybe he disagrees with Rabbi Chanina. Oh, and so by kupai. Let's take a look at the second to last Rashi, 3 lines up from the bottom of the page. Tamunim bein gefanim, right? You find them hidden among the vines. Shebekarim in a vineyard. V'hi shel Yisrael, and it belongs to a Jew. So Rashi is just clarifying the situation. And so doesn't the fact that he says that it's kosher show that he doesn't believe in Rabbi Chanina? Because leilech achar harov, he doesn't go after the rove. Ella achar hakarov, he seems to be following what's proximate. The Kan Yisrael mitzuyim yoser minachrim, and in this location we have more Jews than non-Jews. Below us leaning basar ruba d'alma, and he doesn't follow the majority of the world, which is not Jewish. So shiny hasam, that case is different. Deruba, as we turn to Kafdal and Amabet, Yisrael ninhu, the majority of the people who pour wine in this particular area are Jews. And vahani mili biravrave. And what we're talking about is large bags of wine, because large bags of wine people don't travel with. And so as a result, if somebody has a large bag of wine, it must be from this area. When it comes to small bags of wine, maybe it came from somebody who is traveling, and therefore it might be not kosher. But if there are large bags together with small bags, but then we could say that it was put on the animal in order to balance it, as Rashi tells us. Take a look at Amor ba'avrure havim manche lahashavot masa, in order to equalize the weight. Hachamor of the donkey. Kishiyeshte nodot zeh gadol mizeh. When you have 2 bags, one is larger than the other, ma'at, by a little bit. Umachbid hamasal etzad echad, and now the load is heavier on one side. Manichim nod katan, it's low. You'll put a small bag of wine on the other side of lahashros hamasa in order to equalize the weight. And so as a result, that's what we're talking about. And so as a result, the bottom line is that, again, all of this seems to be saying that when we talk about majority, we're talking about frequency. So again, I just want to highlight that's what we end up effectively incorporating. And so all of this is effectively a majority with proximity, with frequency. So marchikin is ha'ila min ha'ir.
Well, sorry, what Rashi was that? What was the
last Rashi before the Mishnah? Fourth, 3 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
So again, lahashros masa, in order to equalize the weight, hachamorf on the donkey, kishiyeshte notice, because when you have two bags, zegadol mizet, where one is larger than the other, ma'at, a little bit, umachbid hamasal etzad echad, so now it's heavier on one side, manicha nod katan, it's low. You put another small bag on the other side, lahashros hamasa, in order to equalize the weight. Okay, so now we get to the next Mishnah, and we go back to the distancing concept. So, you have to distance a tree from a city by at least 25 amot, and when it comes to a carob tree or a sycamore tree, you have to do 50 amos. Abba Shaul Omer, and Abba Shaul says, Kol Ilan Surak chamishim amos, and any tree that doesn't give any fruit, you have to do 50 amos as well. V'im ha'ir kadma, if the city was there first, and Rashi will explain in the Gemara what we're talking about, why this prohibition would exist. But that's the beginning of the Gemara. So, and if the city was there first, then you cut down the tree and you don't pay any compensation. But if the tree was first, then you cut it down, but you then pay compensation. If you're unclear as to if it's uncertain as to which one was first, so then you cut it down, but you don't have to pay any compensation. So my time, what's the reason? Why is it bad to have trees next to the edge of a city? So Amar Ula Mishum Noi Ha'ir, for the city beautification of the city, meaning that the idea is that you should have an equal area around the city that is completely empty, so that when you approach the city, you have the opportunity to see the walls of the city, the houses of the city, whatever it is that you're walking into. There's like a definition to it, and that is going to make it look more beautiful.
Urban planning.
Exactly, urban planning, 100%. But tepochle de'ein osin sada migrash below migrash sada. Well, 1 second. Don't we already know that you can't put trees there? Because there's a rule that says that you're not allowed to turn a field into a migrash or a migrash into a field. Migrash refers to the first 1,000 amos of outside of a city. And our understanding at this moment is that it means not planting there any trees and not planting there any seeds of growth for things like grains and the like. So lo srika the Rebbe Eliezer. No, you're right that with that statement we would not need our Mishnah, but we need it for Rebbe Eliezer, because what does Rebbe Eliezer say? To Amar Osin Sada Migrash Migrash Sada. He allows you to make those transfers, and Haka. So here. Mishum Noi Ha'ir Lo Abdinan. So even though you can make the immediate 1,000 amos around the city into a field, you still have to give at least 25 amos for the beautification of the city. And you know what? Even according to the rabbis, we can explain this, because the Amar ain't Osin Sada Migrash Lo Migrash Sada. Because what do they mean that you can't turn a field into a migrash or a migrash into a field? Hani Mili Zroim. That's talking about planting grains, seeds of grains. About ilanos, when it comes to trees, abdinan, then you would do it. And yet, even though you could do it, when it comes to within 25 amos of the city, we're not going to do it because of the beautification of the city. Uminat tamra. So how do we know this idea? Deshiny bein zroim li'ilanot, that there's this difference between grain and trees. Tanya, because listen to this brisa. Karpav yoter mi beit sasayim. This actually brisa is about carrying on Shabbos. And if you have a karpav, a very large area that is open to the sky, and it's 2 base sa, as shahuk of ladira, and yet you surround it with a wall for the purpose of making it a residential use. You want to use it as your backyard. Well, then that's totally fine. You can carry there. But Nizra Robo, if in fact you take and you plant a majority of it with grain seeds, Harehu Kagina Va'asr, now it becomes a garden and it's going to be prohibited to carry there. Nita Ruba, but if in fact you don't plant grain there, but you plant trees there, Harehu Kachatzer Umutter, that's like a courtyard. Courtyards have trees. Not and therefore it's not a garden, and therefore you would be able to carry. Then it's a place that people stroll, and so as a result, it's going to be totally fine. Okay, so therefore we've seen that there's this difference between planting trees where people do walk and planting gardens where people don't walk, and therefore you wouldn't be able to carry. And similarly, we would make the distinction between what you can do in the 1,000 amos immediately around the city. Okay, we said that if the city's first, you cut it down and you don't have to pay. Now, Maishna Gabi Bor, what about when we have a pit to Ketani? Because we're going to have a Mishnah that's going to teach us that if in fact even though the tree was there first, we're going to force the tree owner to cut it down, and the pit, even though the pit was there first, we're going to force the tree owner to cut it down, and the pit owner has to pay the tree owner, even though the tree owner shouldn't have done his planting of the tree because the pit was already there. But here we say that you don't pay. So Amar of Kahana, Kidra debe shutfa lo chamim v'lo karira. There's a pot in charge of two cooks. The food, when you have a pot that when two cooks in a kitchen is never a good thing. The pot doesn't get hot and it doesn't get cold because one of them will be trying to get it hot, the other one will be trying to get it cold, or both of them will just completely think that the other one's doing everything. So umay kusha. Well, 1 second. I don't understand. What kind of question is this? Of course, there's a difference. Dilma shiny hazika derabim uma mehazika deyachid. Maybe the point is that damage done to an individual, then an individual needs to make it up for the person who's doing the damage. That even
Don't
though
we say that he planted the tree after the pit was there? So he was.
Yes,
So why?
even
So
though
why do we have to reimburse? He knew that there was a pit. He shouldn't have planted the tree. So why does the owner of the pit have to pay?
Because he has to give him the expense that's associated with it. We're going to deal with that when we get to that Mishnah. So you're absolutely right to raise the question, like, why should he have to pay? But that's what the Mishnah says. So for the moment, we're just going to assume it. And the point is that we're going to see that that's in fact what the rule is. So you're asking a good question on the rule, but we'll get to that. But right now, the point is that there's a big difference when you have a public damage, even in the case in the public damage. Well, then we're not going to reimburse you for making the mistake. In the private damage, we're going to reimburse your expenses. That's the idea. We're only going to reimburse your expenses. Okay. So Ella, so as a result, we've now answered our question with a different answer. It's not about the fact that there are two cooks. It's about the fact that it's not about the fact that there's it's not. Oh no. Oh, hold on just a second. My battery's running low. Didn't expect it to go so fast. Hold on. Okay.
Be careful.
Yeah.
No one cold.
Right. Okay. So we don't say that it's because of the two cooks issue, but rather we say that it's because of the fact that one is damaging the public and one is damaging private. So Ella, so where did Rav Kahana make this statement? Itmar de Rav Kahana, Aseifa Itmar. Rav Kahana's statement was made in connection with this because it said, Im ha'ilan kadam kotis v'nosing damim. When it came to the tree, that where if the tree was first, we say that you do cut it down and then you pay the money. Belema lahu, why not let the owner say, Havuli beresha dmei behadar ekuts, first pay me and then cut it down. So Amar of Kahana, Kidra debe shutfa lo chamim lo karira. The issue is that if you have two cooks in the kitchen, well, then things don't happen. So second Y line in Rashi, lo chamima, im bat lahamtin ad matan mot. If in fact you were to say that you need to wait to cut it down until the guy got the money, yamodze la'orach yamim. This tree will end up standing for a long time. B'nei ha'ir somchin zeh al zeh, that everybody will wait for, in the city will wait for somebody else to make the payment. Ubal ha'ilan, and the owner of the tree, rotzebekach, he wants the delay. Lefikach, therefore, yikot. Therefore, we have to cut it down first. And once we cut it down, Yigma Meosav, then the guy can collect his money Mehen Beit Din. He can collect his money in Beit Din, but he won't go to Beit Din to collect the money because he'd rather have the tree stay there. So that's why we're going to say that you have to cut it down first. Next piece of the Mishnah. So our Mishnah said, Suffolk Zekadam, Kotzitz ve'eno nosin damim. You cut it down and you don't pay money. Ma'ishnami bor. In the bor case, in the pit case, damrat lo kyakots. We don't cut down the tree if we're not sure which one came first. Well, hasam devade lo lemekats kai sveikanami lo amrin and lekots. Well, when it comes to a pit, we don't definitely cut down the tree, because if the tree came first, we would allow the tree to stay. So therefore, when we're uncertain, we can't cut down the tree. But hacha devade lemekats kai. But here, when we definitely know that we're going to cut it down, because it doesn't make a difference. If the tree was first, we cut it down. If the city was first, we cut it down. So it doesn't make a difference. So sveikunami amrin and lekots will tell them to cut it down. V'imishum dmei. But when it comes to the money, amrin and le, we tell them, I do raya v'shkol. You have to collect your money and then you'll get paid. Okay, so let's do the next Mishnah. So marchikin es hagorin kavua min ha'ir chamishim amma, that you need to separate a granary 50 amos from a city. Lo yasa adam gorin kavua b'toch shalo. You should not, and similarly, you shouldn't make a granary within your property. You have to leave at least 50 amos in every direction. And you have to separate from your friends' plantings, meaning their trees, and from their field, the kadesh lo yazik, far enough that you don't do damage. So Maishna ratio, Umaishna Seifa, what's the difference between the first case and the latter case? In the first case, we say the amount of distance, but in the last case, when it came to the field and the saplings and the trees, we don't give a distance. So Amar Abaye Seifa Asan Legorin She'eno Kavua. Maybe what we're dealing with is the first situation is sorry for not scrolling. The first situation is a situation where it's a permanent granary, and the second situation is a temporary granary. And a temporary granary, we don't necessarily have a set distance for. So, Heiki Dami Goren She'enu Kavua, what is the meaning of a temporary granary? So, I'm Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Kol She'enu Zora Barachas. Anytime you don't use a shovel in order to do the winnowing, meaning you do smaller amounts. Rav Ashi Amar Matam Kamar. Rav Ashi gives an alternative answer. He says that's not the reason, but rather we're explaining the rest of the Mishnah. My time marchikin gorim kavua min ha'ir chamishin amo. Why do we have to distance everything by 50 amos? Kadesh lo yazik, so it doesn't do damage. Meisvei, they had a challenge to Abaye, because listen to the following brisa. Marchikin gorim kavua min ha'ir chamishin amo. You have to separate a granary from a city by 50 amos. Ukashem shemarchikin min ha'ir chamishim amo kach marchikin miduluav umikishuav uminituasav uminiro shel chaveru chamishim amo. Similarly, you have to separate 50 amos from your neighbor's gourds and cucumbers and trees and plowed field. Kadesh lo yazik, so it doesn't do damage. So doesn't this show that Rav Ashi is correct? Bishlam Rav Ashi nicha. It all makes sense according to Rav Ashi, because he's the one who said that the reason that we don't do these within 50 amos is because of the damage, because the Mishnah was explaining what the reasoning for the distancing is. El Abaye kasha, but according to Abaye, it is a question. So yes, kasha, it is a good question. So bimishlam, now we said in this price that we just quoted, mimikshuav miduluav, that we want to separate from cucumbers and gourds, that because the chaff is going to fly from the granary and reach into these into these plants and then dry them all out, and it'll be bad. Elamaniru amai. But why do you have to separate them from a plowed field? Won't the chaff be like manure and actually help the field? Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zabda ve'item Rabbi Abba Bar Zutra. So one of them said, one of the Rabbi Abbas said, Mipnei she'osa otel galal. No, the problem is that it makes the entire field into a manure field. And so as Rashi says, she'osa otel galal, mar below zevel. It ends up being too much manure. V'sorif is azroim. And it ends up being burning to the seeds. One of the things that you learn is that actually, too much manure is problems. Shenizrobo. So the seeds that are planted in that field will end up getting ruined. So, all right, so now we've reached the next Mishnah. And if you want to know other things that must be kept 50 amot from a city, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
Yes,
Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Apologies about the power outage. Apologies about the not having my regular computer. Hopefully everything came through okay. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Yes. Good
What
job.
happened last night? David?
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Bye, Sam.